Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about something pretty amazing, the planet's own ultimate recycling program. We call them biogeochemical cycles. Now that sounds complicated, but it's really just about how Earth reuses all the essential ingredients for life, making sure that absolutely nothing goes to waste on this little planet of ours. So let's dive right in. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the big picture, the fundamental systems that make life possible in the first place. Then, we'll take a tour through the major cycles, water, carbon, and a couple of key nutrients. After that, we'll get into our role in all of this, and we'll wrap up with the absolute must-know points for your exams. All right, before we jump into the cycles themselves, we need to get a handle on the three pillars that hold up all life on Earth. You can think of these as the basic rules of the game. They're what make everything else we're about to talk about even possible. So these three pillars work together perfectly. First up, you've got energy from the sun. It's like a one-way street. Energy comes in, powers everything from the weather to plants growing, and then it radiates back out into space. Second, we have the cycling of matter. Now, unlike energy, the actual stuff, the water, the carbon, the nutrients, it's all finite. We can't make more, so we have to reuse it. And third, there's gravity. It's the force that literally holds our atmosphere to the planet and helps drive the movement of all this stuff through the cycles. And really, this quote just nails the core idea. Earth is what we call a closed system when it comes to matter. This is why these cycles aren't just, a neat little process. They are absolutely essential for survival. Without this constant recycling, life as we know it would have run out of building blocks a long, long time ago. Let's start with our first cycle, and it's probably the one you're most familiar with, the journey of water. You've probably heard Earth called the water planet, and for good reason. This cycle is basically the heartbeat of our world's climate and all its ecosystems. So the hydrologic cycle is just this continuous movement of water on the surface, in the air, and underground. And what makes water so incredibly special is its high heat capacity. What that means is it can soak up a ton of heat without its own temperature changing all that much. This is huge because it allows our oceans to act like a giant climate buffer, protecting the whole planet from wild temperature swings. Okay, so we call it the water planet, but this chart, it's pretty startling when you look at it. A whopping 97% of all water is salt water in the oceans. Of that tiny 3% that's freshwater, most of it is frozen solid in glaciers or buried deep underground. The amount that's actually available for us, for animals, for plants, it's a minuscule fraction of a percent. And that right there is why managing our water is so critical. The journey itself is this really simple, elegant loop. The sun's energy heats up water in lakes and oceans, causing evaporation. Plants also pitch in by releasing water vapor. We call that transpiration. So this vapor rises, it cools off, and it condenses into clouds. And when the water droplets get heavy enough, boom, we get precipitation. Rain, snow, sleet. Once it's on the ground, the water either soaks into the soil, that's infiltration, or it flows over the surface as runoff, finding its way back to rivers and oceans to start the whole thing over again. All right, on to our next big player, carbon. If water is the planet's lifeblood, you could say carbon is its backbone. It's the fundamental building block of every living thing. And the carbon cycle is really a story of two opposite but perfectly balanced processes. Think about this. Every single organic molecule in your body, in your hair, your skin, your cells, has a carbon atom at its very core. And those little atoms, they've been on an unbelievable journey through time. The carbon atom in your thumb right now might have been part of a dinosaur millions of years ago, or maybe it was locked away in a rock deep inside the Earth. The carbon cycle truly connects all of life, past and present. It's pretty cool. So at the very heart of the biological part of this cycle, you have these two processes that are like mirror images of each other. On one side, you've got photosynthesis. That's where plants use sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make their own food, basically sugar. On the other side, you've got respiration. That's where organisms, and that includes both plants and animals, break down that sugar to get energy, and they release carbon dioxide and water in the process. Let's break it down. Photosynthesis, which plants do, literally takes CO2 out of the atmosphere to store energy. Respiration, which we all do, plants and animals, puts that CO2 back into the atmosphere to release the energy. They are the yin and the yang of the carbon cycle. It's this beautiful reciprocal exchange that, in a balanced world, keeps the amount of carbon in our atmosphere pretty stable. Okay, now let's talk about two other really crucial elements, nitrogen and phosphorus. They might not be as famous as carbon, but trust me, without them, life just wouldn't exist. They are essential nutrients. And what's interesting is that their cycles are driven by some of the smallest life forms on the planet, bacteria. Our atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen gas. But for most of us, that nitrogen is like a locked treasure chest. We can't get to it, we can't use it. The key is held by some very special bacteria. They're a process called nitrogen fixation. These amazing microbes take that nitrogen from the air and convert it into forms like ammonia and nitrate, which plants can then absorb. These tiny bacteria are the real heroes of the nitrogen cycle. They make it all happen. Now, the phosphorus cycle, this one is the slow and steady member of the group. Unlike the others we've talked about, it doesn't really have a gas phase. Phosphorus is mostly found in rocks, and it's released very, very slowly as those rocks break down over time. It gets picked up by plants, moves through the food web, and eventually ends up back in the soil or the ocean. And because this whole process is so slow, phosphorus is often what we call the limiting nutrient in an ecosystem. Its scarcity can literally set the speed limit for how fast an entire forest can grow. So we've got these elegant, ancient, and for the most part, pretty balanced cycles that have been running for billions of years. But in just the last couple of hundred years, a new, powerful force has started to shake things up. Us, human activity. Let's take a look at how our actions are kind of changing the rules of the game. You'll see our impacts are all deeply connected. When we burn fossil fuels, we release huge amounts of stored carbon, messing with the carbon cycle on a global scale. When we use industrial fertilizers, we introduce way more nitrogen and phosphorus into the environment than is natural. That stuff then runs off farms and overloads rivers and lakes. And even just clearing land disrupts the water cycle, leading to more runoff and soil erosion. It all ties together. And a major consequence of all that extra nitrogen and phosphorus is something called eutrophication. Here's what happens. When all those fertilizer nutrients wash into a lake, they cause a massive, explosive growth of algae. We call it an algal bloom. But when all that algae dies and starts to decompose, that process sucks all the oxygen out of the water. This creates huge dead zones where fish and other animals just can't survive. And this isn't a rare thing. It's a growing problem all over the world. Okay, I know we've covered a ton of ground. So to make sure you've got the most important stuff locked in, let's do a quick review. You can think of this next slide as your personal study guide, the absolute key concepts you'll want to remember. So let's just run through the essentials. For water, remember its role in regulating our climate, a process that all starts with evaporation. For carbon, remember it's the building block of life, and photosynthesis is the front door for how it gets into the food web. For nitrogen, it's essential for proteins and DNA, and nitrogen fixation is the process that makes it usable. And finally, for phosphorus, which is crucial for energy, remember its main source is the super slow weathering of rock. If you can remember these key points, you'll be in great shape. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Learning about these cycles isn't just about passing a test. It's about really understanding how our world works and what our place is in it. And once you see how deeply connected everything is, it really forces you to think, how can we live our lives in a way that works with these natural, sustainable systems instead of against them? Thanks for tuning in.